What if you could use hacked Pokemon in battles? You could use Wonder Guard Spiritomb, or maybe Huge Power Slacking, or even Flash Fire Ferrothorn. Whatever you can think of, you can use. Well, kind of, but we'll get to that later. Originally called Sharkmons, named after the game shark that you can use to get hacked Pokemon, Hackmons is a format where you can use hacked Pokemon competitively versus other hacked Pokemon. Hacked Pokemon still have to work within the guidelines of actual Pokemon, so you can't change the base stat of a Pokemon or move, but other things are hackable. Namely, you can put any ability on any Pokemon, any move on any Pokemon, and you can put 252 EVs in every stat. Most hacked Pokemon gameplay takes place on a simulator known as Pokemon Showdown, and people have been playing it for over a decade now. Let's take a look at the evolution of competitive hacked Pokemon from its beginnings in Generation 5 to now in Generation 9, starting from Gen 5, the very beginning. We start with Generation 5, the beginning of competitive hacked Pokemon. You could hack Pokemon even before Gen 5, but there really wasn't a concerted movement to actually make a playable competitive format out of it. Generation 5 is really when there were enough people interested in actually playing it. So in a world where anything is possible, what do? With an infinite amount of possibilities, you can do whatever you want, and it feels like a dream for anyone who loves to build teams. But reality is very different from a dream. Fundamentally, with anything competitive, people play to win. Wonder Guard strategies and one-hit KO move strategies were by and far the best strategies you could use. With combinations like No Guard and Sheer Cold, you could make your Pokemon almost unstoppable. Similarly, Wonder Guard on any Pokemon not named Shedinja is extremely deadly too. Wonder Guard and Oko moves were so much better than every other strategy. Every tactic or idea or strategy you choose must be built with Wonder Guard and one-hit KO in mind. For example, you could use Mold Breaker to get through Wonder Guard. The metagame was entirely built around these two strategies and ways you could use to beat these two strategies. It was a paradox. On paper, it was a world where you could do anything, but in reality, it led to having less practical options. You could use something different for the sake of being different, but oftentimes you would be strictly worse off than if you chose to build a Wonder Guard or one-hit KO move-based strategy. The truth is, it wasn't very fun to a lot of people. The point of playing Hackmons is that you can do anything, and you couldn't really do that. The natural solution was to create a format called Balanced Hackmons. Balanced Hackmons would ban things that were unbalanced or too overpowered, even for hacked Pokemon standards. For example, Wonder Guard and one-hit KO moves were banned initially, along with Huge Power a few months later. Huge Power and Pure Power are dominating strategies, and doubling your attack is incredibly ridiculous, and oftentimes there's no reason to use a different ability than Huge Power. You really had no reason not to just use Pokemon like Huge Power Slacking in all 16 slots. With Wonder Guard and one-hit KO banned, that became the new dominant strategy, and there was really no reason not to use it. There became two formats for competitive hacked Pokemon: Pure Hackmons, which would never have bans, and Balanced Hackmons, which would ban Pokemon to make the format more playable and fun, whatever that means to people. Fun is the operative word here. It's whatever people define it to be. If people like spamming Sheer Cold every turn and playing around strategies like that, that's what would be the main format. But natural selection ran its course, and more people played Balanced Hackmons than Pure Hackmons. Balanced Hackmons is the dominant hacked Pokemon metagame even now. For the most part, except for Generation 6, when people talk about competitive hacked Pokemon, they're almost always referring to Balanced Hackmons. Pure Hackmon still exists and is playable, and maybe it's what you find fun, and there is merit to finding cool ways to stopping No Guard or Wonder Guard, but it does have far fewer people playing it than Balanced Hackmons. So what happened in Generation 5 Balanced Hackmons? Fundamentally, because you can use any Pokemon with any ability and any moves, what actually matters is a Pokemon's stats, typing, and access to signature items. For example, Latios was the only Pokemon that could take advantage of the Deadly Soul Dew item. Breloom in standard play had low stats, but was good because it could use Spore. Obviously, Breloom was not going to be good in Hackmons, where any Pokemon could use Spore. Typically, the Pokemon with the best stats are the best Pokemon, and there are fewer usable Pokemon compared to standard play. What matters is how you use the Pokemon, and there was one more devastating strategy that was going to get banned. It was Shadow Tag and Arena Trap. Trapping is generally considered to be overpowered in standard play, and Shadow Tag and Arena Trap have been banned in every generation since Generation 4. Hacked Pokemon is no different, and it's honestly even stronger in the format. Any Pokemon could have Shadow Tag and trap another Pokemon. The only way out would be to use a move like Gastro Acid or Worry Seed. Mold Breaker doesn't work because it only works on moves, not abilities, and Ghost-type Pokemon couldn't inherently escape Shadow Tag like it could in modern generations. Switching is a fundamental part of the game, even in hacked Pokemon. One of the more popular trapping strategies was Perish trapping. You could take an insanely bulky Pokemon and give them Shadow Tag and Perish Song. This was most common with Giratina, but was also usable by any defensive Pokemon like Lugia. You would trap a Pokemon with Shadow Tag and then use Perish Song and stall out 3 turns with your high defense. Then, on the last turn, you would switch out while your opponent is forced to faint. This strategy was incredibly strong because it was tough to break out of the Perish Song versus extremely high defense Pokemon. You would need something like Prankster Taunt to stop the Perish Song, and even then, you'd have to be able to beat Giratina in a PP stall. Some Pokemon even began running Shadow Tag defensively too. A Shadow Tag Pokemon can escape another Shadow Tag Pokemon, so that was an option too. People were literally running Shadow Tag so that they wouldn't get Shadow Trapped themselves. However, that made things even more convoluted. People then started using Arena Trap. Arena Trap has less targets because it doesn't work on Levitate or Flying Pokemon, but in exchange, it can't be escaped by a defensive Shadow Tag. Even for a hacked Pokemon format, these Perish trapping strategies were deadly. Besides Perish trapping, there was also Baton Pass trapping. You would trap a Pokemon that can't touch you, and then use Acupressure, Recover, and finally Baton Pass. If you trap the right Pokemon, then your opponent can't do enough damage to you as you Acupressure and boost every single stat to the maximum. Then you Baton Pass to a Sweeper Pokemon. This Sweeper Pokemon would be equipped with different ways to combat its checks. For example, it would have stored power for the Unaware ability, and it would also have a strong priority move, that way it can outspeed Prankster Heart Swap. It would also have Substitute to protect against Pokemon that might have Imposter, Ditto's original ability. Because the Sweeper Pokemon outsourced the boosting to a different Pokemon, it had more flexibility to customize its moveset to eliminate the usual counters to powerful Sweepers. Anything could be using Shadow Tag to pick off a Pokemon and go for an automatic win. You're only as strong as your weakest link, and every Pokemon had to be Shadow Tag proofed, otherwise it would be the weak link that automatically leads to a game loss. But even then, Shadow Tag proofing a team isn't really possible because Shadow Tag teams have their own tactics too. For example, Trick and Choice Scarf was a common idea because a Pokemon becomes vulnerable to trapping if earlier in the game it gets tricked a Choice Scarf. In Gen 5, you couldn't really stop a trick from happening because there were no Mega Pokemon or Z moves yet. Ultimately, people decided that the format would be better off banning Shadow Tag and Arena Trap entirely. Shadow Tag and Arena Trap were the final bans of Generation 5, and the balanced Hackmons format meta started anew and developed from there. Predictably, the best Pokemon were all legendaries with high stat totals, but one stood above the rest, and that was Latios. Latios was unique in that it could hold the Soul Dew item, which was basically a free Calm Mind. That statistically made it one of the top Pokemon in the format. Also, the Pokestar Pokemon were legal too because you could in fact use them as a hacked Pokemon in the actual games. Their stats are pretty average, but Pokestar Spirit's Dark and Ghost type is nice to have, and Pokestar M1 Steel type was amazing too. In Generation 5, even hacked Arceus forms had to have the multi-type ability, so Pokestar MT was a weaker version of Steel Arceus but had an ability slot. But to be honest, it makes more sense to talk about abilities than Pokemon. The good Pokemon are relatively straightforward because they have good stats, but abilities are what make them special. Broadly, there were offensive abilities like Contrary, defensive abilities like Unaware, and support abilities like Prankster. One of the most important abilities was Imposter. Imposter copies everything about an opponent except their HP. Ditto has a low HP, so it never really mattered that much. But now, Chansey and Blissey could use Imposter and copy an opponent and retain their high HP stat. Every Sweeper Pokemon you use had to be Imposter proofed in some way. Otherwise, a Blissey could copy you, steal all your boosts while maintaining a HP stat above 800. For example, a Pokemon with Unburdened Belly Drum and Citrus Berry couldn't be effectively copied by Imposter because the Imposter Pokemon would still have its item and therefore not actually trigger Unburden. You could also use Pokemon that could PP stall themselves, like a Pokemon with Quiver Dance and Recover. Interestingly, people even used a plate item plus Judgment. For example, offensive Gengar could use Gengar and a plate. Then, when Chansey or Blissey copies Gengar, it can't actually touch it because Judgment is a normal type move without a plate. Also, more simply, Pokemon could use Substitute. You could also play the longer game and focus on chipping down an Imposter Pokemon over time. Imposter wasn't broken because you did have a lot of options. If anything, Imposter was good to limit the number of options that are created when every Pokemon can boost. The Imposter versus Sweepers metagame was extremely relevant, and your Pokemon either had to be Imposter proofed or you had to have ways to get around Chansey or Blissey. Beyond sweeping, Imposter has more general applications too. You could copy any Pokemon and get good value out of their moveset and your high HP. Also, it's good for scouting out the moveset of the opponent. Another common defensive ability was Unaware. Simply put, when every Pokemon gets Shell Smash or Quiver Dance or whatever it may be, you need a way to handle them. Unaware can get broken by Mold Breaker among other things, but an Unaware Pokemon forms a nice combination with Imposter Chansey. Chansey could handle Mold Breaker and Unaware could handle other strategies like Unburden. Any defensive Pokemon could make Unaware work like Cresselia, Giratina, or Arceus. But speaking of Mold Breaker, that was also a common ability for two distinct reasons. One, it was good on offensive Pokemon to get through defensive abilities. Unaware is a standout ability to beat, but there's a lot of smaller ones too. You could use Mold Breaker to get past a Flash Fire Steel type or a Dry Skin Pokemon. The other reason was that it was good for status conditions and hazards because it could beat Magic Bounce. Mold Breaker hazards and Mold Breaker Toxic or Spore were very valuable to get through Magic Bounce Pokemon. Any Pokemon could justify using Mold Breaker. In a tier run by abilities, Mold Breaker wasn't flashy, but it was consistently good. That leads us into Magic Bounce, another top ability. Magic Bounce was often on defensive Pokemon to protect them from Toxic and also use them as a way to stop Stealth Rock. Any Pokemon could use Magic Bounce, and that made setting up hazards risky in the early game. You had to use Mold Breaker Stealth Rock or use moves like Skill Swap. But you might be wondering, why would Magic Bounce be good at all if Stealth Rock Pokemon use Mold Breaker anyway? And it's because they didn't all use Mold Breaker, because there was also Prankster. In particular, there was Prankster Taunt. It formed almost a rock, paper, scissors triangle. Prankster Pokemon would beat Mold Breaker Pokemon by taunting them first and getting hazards up. Mold Breaker Pokemon would beat Magic Bounce Pokemon, and Magic Bounce Pokemon would beat Prankster Pokemon. The hazard metagame was a game within the game, and it was an interesting dynamic to try and get your hazards up. Prankster also had more utility than just hazards. Prankster Taunt is generally good overall, and moves like Prankster Heart Swap could stop powerful setup sweep. Different defensive combinations of Prankster Heart Swap, Unaware, and Imposter were the main way to stop setup sweepers in a format where any Pokemon can boost up. Interestingly, Prankster was also good on certain offensive Pokemon like Landorus T. In Generation 5, Nature Power, which is affected by Prankster, turns into Earthquake. Basically, Prankster Landorus T had a priority stab Earthquake. Coming back to hazards, Defog didn't remove hazards on your side of the field yet, so you had to use Rapid Spin. But Rapid Spinning versus Giratina and Pokestar were extremely tough. You could run Scrappy Rapid Spin, but that's a large commitment which is only useful for one thing. Another option was to find a way to fit Rapid Spin on a powerful Pokemon like Life Orb, Magic Guard, Reshiram. Hazards were definitely a defining factor of the Gen 5 metagame. Poison Heal plus Toxic Orb was also an excellent strategy for Pokemon to become incredibly hard to take down. Poison Heal life score dominated a metagame, and now imagine that on a Pokemon like Kyogre or Regigigas. The Poison Heal Toxic Orb combo would be used on purely defensive Pokemon to give them recovery, or bulky sweeper Pokemon too. It's great in a metagame where every Pokemon has Spore and you can avoid having to deal with that. It's also good for when you want to use Spore yourself, because you can Spore without being afraid of Magic Bounce. The main example is Quiver Dance Kyogre, who was really tanky and would use Poison Heal to gain health every single turn. Another strong offensive ability was Contrary. Powerful Pokemon like Latios could throw off Draco Meteors and Psycho Boosts and get rewarded for it. Unaware Pokemon may be able to negate the boosting aspect of Contrary, but those Pokemon still had to be able to take on Draco Meteor after Draco Meteor. In the case of Latios, Imposter Blissey doesn't copy Soul Dew, so that was another benefit too. Beyond that, there were other generally good abilities. You could use weather strategies with Drizzle and Swift Swim on any Pokemon. Sheer Force and Life Orb is a good combination on any attacking Pokemon because Sheer Force can negate Life Orb recoil. Adaptability is also a consistently strong ability. Ho-Oh, or any Stealth Rock weak Pokemon for that matter, could use Magic Guard to gain an immunity to Stealth Rock. Regenerator, Tinted Lens, etc. They were all fine options as long as you had a tangible reason to use it instead of some of the more standard abilities. Even Illusion was a fun option to play tricks on your opponent. Notably, Sturdy Shedinja with Endeavor wasn't too popular because without Defog, Stealth Rock were more difficult to keep off the field. You did have options like the Scrappy Rapid Spin we mentioned earlier, but generally speaking it was high effort. Constantly having to react and find a place to get off a Rapid Spin means you can get overrun by various offensive tools like V-Create or Draco Meteor spam. Weather was also permanent in Generation 5, so you had to be careful versus Sand and Hail strategy. Shedinja is a type of Pokemon that you have to prepare for because it can auto-win if you're not careful, but it can struggle to be effective at times. These strategies are all metagame staples and are for the most part universal throughout any generation of balanced Hackmons. Contrary Draco Meteor will always be Contrary Draco Meteor. But even then, there are changes in the metagame over time as people optimize even further and find even more powerful strategies. Gen 5 balanced Hackmons doesn't get played a lot nowadays, but modern Gen 5 is still different from Gen 5 Hackmons from the early 2010s. For one, Sleep Pause was added to Gen 5 Hackmons sometime around when Gen 7 was the current gen, mainly because by then there was a better understanding of how strong Gen 5 Sleep was. Flashfire Escavalier used to be a top Pokemon back in the day, but now people prefer Steel types with more special bulk overall like the Pokestar Pokemon. Latios was not considered the best Pokemon back then, but is considered to be clearly the best Pokemon now. Overall, the Generation 5 metagame is relatively bulky, which is somewhat inherent to balanced Hackmons because you can max out EVs and every Pokemon can have recovery. However, there's plenty of room for offense, especially with the powerful Draco Meteor. There's no Fairy-type Pokemon yet, so you have to rely on Steel types like Ferrothorn or Pokestar to take on powerful Dragon-type Pokemon. These powerful dragons like Latios or Kyurem White are inherently strong but can also use Contrary to ravage a team. Inherent to Gen 5, critical hits do double damage, so defensive playstyles are capped to an extent. Gen 5 is a balanced fight where the main source of breaking power is through Dragon-type Pokemon. Gen 5 was a stepping stone for the future of balanced Hackmons, and many of the ideas discovered in Gen 5 are still powerful in modern generations today. Generation 5 balanced Hackmons was popular enough at the time, and it was continued for Generation 6. Generation 6 continued where Gen 5 left off, but with one difference. Gen 6 pure Hackmons was just as played as Gen 6 balanced Hackmon. In fact, it's the only generation where that's true, but that's a story for another day.